Welcome to Focus For Me podcast. Today we have with us Nathan Kohlerman. Very excited for Nathan to be here. We're going to talk a lot about just some of Nathan's past experience when it comes to being in the military, some addictions as a child and as a teenager, and his transformation through that process, which really led him into his mindfulness and meditation practice that he has today. Nathan's amazing bio. He uses several methods of assessment and movement optimization, which allows Nathan to create the space for those he works with to gain a further understanding of themselves. When he works with someone, he first assesses and to improve their ability to have a better dialogue with their body. For those suffering with pain and injuries, Nathan has found through the years that it's not always the physical that creates the pain, but it lies much, much deeper. So exploring movement as a way of expressing emotion. Exploring movement can be a way of expressing emotion, overcoming fear, and truly having an experience that is somewhat spiritual in the sense that movement becomes the flow. Through assessment, movement, and flow, Nathan is able to teach and coach clients through their biggest barriers and empower them with the tools to express themselves, heal themselves, and be one with themselves. Nathan, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for being here today and just sharing your story and a little bit about yourself. I'm super excited to be in conversation with you and for all of our listeners to learn more about who you are. And so let's just dive right in if you're good with that.
Yeah, I am. Thank you so much for having me, Jesse.
You're very welcome. Welcome to Focus For Me. All right, let's focus. So let's jump right in and talk. You've got a pretty diverse background when it comes to just some of the things you've accomplished and what your goals and things are for now. But let's start maybe back in childhood. What did you want to be when you grew up, and how did that kind of evolve into who you are now?
Right, yeah, it's actually kind of funny. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a lawyer. And, it seemed like the thing to do. You either go to school to be a doctor, you go to school to be a lawyer. My mom was a nurse. My dad didn't really go to school at all, but he's a very successful electrical engineer. But going through, school and everything else, I kind of realized that traditional education wasn't my forte. I wasn't interested in the courses. I wasn't really committed to learning the traditional school structure. And of course, after parents' divorce and a bunch of other extenuating circumstances, being an athlete and, indulging in mixed martial arts since the age of 5, I started acting out and going through different types of abuse and, emotional trauma and everything else. I just really didn't even know who I was at that point, to where I took out my aggression on others. I started indulging in drugs. I ended up getting addicted to heroin. And to get clean from heroin, I joined the military. So my goals rapidly shifted there. I wanted to, of course, go into the military and make something of myself, create a new identity. And after 5.5 years, I ended up getting medically discharged. So then I had no idea. But, during my tenure of being in the military, I had picked up competitive bodybuilding and immediately kind of propelled me into personal training. So I used to, and I laugh now because I used to, be the guy pushing people and, bench all this weight and squat all this weight and do this and do that. And I was doing that to myself.
Yeah. It's always a good mirror reflection.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And again, trying to reshape an identity and just setting a goal of becoming a professional bodybuilder and being a fitness model and, just doing training to get me by and to buy my way into these shows. And
so there was nothing when you were a kid that said, I want to grow up to be a fitness model or be a professional, teach people how to do movement and learn to be in their body or coach or anything like that?
Not at all.
Yeah.
I mean,
but what was it that you would say that helped structure that passion into who you are now?
Yeah. So I guess, just being an athlete, being in mixed martial arts and American Kempo specifically, with a little bit of a background in jiu-jitsu and, going through a little bit of boxing and wrestling in high school. Like, I always found my comfort with movement. Now I kind of understand how everything translates, which allows me to move the way I do now, which allows me to teach the way I do now, but also to have that discipline of continuously growing within that practice.
Sure. And it's, both of us just being in health over the years, it's, as we both know, it's so important to have that awareness of the body, mind, spirit connection. and how they work together and how they're so impactful to just being complete as a human being.
Exactly.
As well. So what would you say, if you were to look back in those teen years and when you started acting out, what would you say are some of those, what the fuck moments that you look back and like, what the fuck was I just doing? Or that were like, oh, WTF did I just do? Like, that was actually kind of cool. So kind of a blend between the two. What were some of those, like, what did I just do? And, wow, that was really cool.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind was, just the point where I broke down and I was like, I don't want to be an addict anymore. Like waking up.
Before that, though, what actually brought you to the point of, just getting into some different types of drugs or exploring that journey? How old were you and what started it?
I mean, I started, of course, started smoking cigarettes, started with drinking, getting drunk at school.
How old were you?
I was 14.
14, okay.
Yeah.
So right at high school age?
Yeah.
Okay.
And about the age of 15, before I'd even smoked weed or done any of that, like, the biggest what the fuck moment was literally in my sophomore class, a math class. Like, I was so drunk, like I literally fell asleep in class, passed out. The teacher came to wake me up and I puked all over this other kid. So that was the point where I stepped outside. I was like, what the fuck? Like, I just puked all over somebody. Like, I need to stop and get out of this.
What shifted after that? What changed after that?
I mean, I just went a different path. I was like, well, I don't like to drink anymore, so I'm going to smoke weed. I'm going to go do coke. I'm going to try ecstasy. And I immediately found this weird sensation of not having to feel like myself, and that was like, oh, what the fuck is this?
Yeah.
This is a different feeling. Like, oh, I don't need to actually feel anything. I can just live in this different world,
be disconnected from all the emotions that are there.
Right.
Yeah.
Which, of course, led me to heroin, ultimately.
And how long were you on heroin?
So started heroin when I was about 16 and then quit, shortly before joining the military to get in the military.
And how was that process for you, just quitting and making that decision to like just totally, completely different direction of your life change? I mean, that's a hard drug to quit.
It definitely was. And, I had a little bit of assistance at first to pass the drug test and do everything I could for the military. And kind of moving forward from that, of course, there were relapse moments and moments of weakness and everything else, and the last time I had done it wasn't shortly before I had left. So even during like my first week, like I was still feeling those symptoms, like still feeling like cold shakes at night and not being able to sleep, not being able to eat, like going in at 150 pounds, coming out of just 10 weeks of basic training at like 170. 20 pounds and actually feeling healthy, and that was just a terrible experience, honestly, just going through that pain.
Can't imagine.
Being physically dependent on something is crippling.
And would you say, were you aware of any depression before going into the military and as a teenager, or did that come later?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the depression was always there. The anxiety was always there. I keep on relating back to, of course, with the parent structure that I had, it was just chaos. Parents were always fighting, literally seeing them, even getting physical at times in front of me. And, my dad being, physical with me sometimes, and me being like physically, lashing out against my mom and other aspects of just the whole family structure was chaos. So I always had this like long-lived depression because I was bullied.
Sure.
I didn't have any friends.
You mean you weren't bullying when you were a kid?
No,
No,
definitely
on the
not.
opposite side. Okay.
I was very much on the opposite side.
Okay.
Smallest kid in class, not the most athletic, but not having any type of belonging or community or structure at all. It just kind of made me come home crying every night, or every day, and having my mom comfort me, and her being like the only person who ever really told me, oh, they're just jealous, they just do this, and she tried her best. She really did, and she was there, but the depression was always there.
And what would you say, if you were then look back in kind of that time period, what would be, a WTF moment that you celebrate? Like, oh, that was actually cool. Like, I accomplished that, or I did that.
Yeah, I mean, I did American Kempo for about 12 years, started when I was 5, ended up going to California to test in front of a panel full of black belts and everything else. And that was like my first major accomplishment as a kid.
That's huge. How long did you do that?
12 years.
Oh, 12 years. Okay.
About 12 years.
Yeah.
Right when I got addicted to drugs, it kind of trickled a little bit, and then I just completely lost interest and I lost it. But being 16 years old in California with a group of adults testing for this belt and this structure in my opinion, one of the most difficult martial arts, it was a huge accomplishment of mine that showed me like, no, you are capable of good things. You are worthy of actually completing something and being recognized for something good you're doing.
Yeah, good. That's a tough journey to be on, and with all the mix of all of that, what would you say was the defining moment that had you look at joining the military as being the next goal or the next movement in your life moving forward after high school?
Yeah, so I mean, I remember it like it was yesterday, really. I came out on Christmas morning, I want to say it was, whether it be Christmas or Christmas Eve, and my mom and sister were sitting on the couch, and they just started crying. They're like, we want to help you, because I'd reached out to my sister asking him for methadone, because I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And the week after winter break, going back to school, there were Army recruiters standing outside my school. And I went to Accelerated Learning Center, and it's like a school of 50 people per class. It wasn't a big one. They actually call it Asshole's Last Chance is the nickname of the school. So I can tell you, where I was at. And when I saw those recruiters, it just called to me.
And what branch were you in?
Army, okay.
And you said you were 5 years?
5.5.
5.5 years. And so just say just a little bit about that. Like you were pretty much, it's a pretty strict regimen to follow. How was that impactful for you and kind of where you're at now with goal setting and what you're doing now as far as fitness and movement?
Yeah, a lot of the principles carried over for sure, but there's a lot of things that didn't resonate with me. There's a lot of things that I had a lot of resistance with, being told what to do, having to obey, having to dress a certain way, having to do things not the way I wanted to do them, which I've always had the need now carrying over in my movement strategies and my flow practice and exploring potential. Now it's like, wow, I can express freedom in other ways outside of the norm, in ways that only I can do, and then empowering people with those same tools to do it the way they want to do it.
So do you think seeing the extreme opposite of that, where it wasn't allowed, kind of pushed you into this creative, almost not like rebellion is the word, but almost this creative rebellion to create something for yourself that actually really worked?
Oh, 100%. It's like I've always had these structures and limitations and boundaries set. Like I have bars on my windows, at home, from sneaking out and doing stuff. So again, controlled. Yeah. I'd be doing this. Oh, we're taking the door off. Control. Yeah. It just seemed like every single part of my life, like people have been trying to like steer me the way they want to steer me. Yeah. And that completely carried over to me not wanting any part of that now.
Yeah. And so what part of being, what would you say, how much being in the military and that structure contributed to, some of the depression already began, some of the anxiety already began, but how much of being in the military and that environment contributed more to anxiety, PTSD, depression?
Yeah, luckily I was in an air defense artillery branch, so, I didn't even see bullets fly at me.
Okay.
So it wasn't even that type of military exposure, but just the fact of how everything was structured and regimented, when things weren't done correctly, it was made to a point like, you're a fuck up, like you're an idiot, so a lot of those things like triggered me a lot of the time, which put me in these downward spirals of, well, I'm not good enough to be in the military. I'm not good enough to do this, even though I made, my rank of sergeant in 2.5 years, which is one of the fastest you can make it. Mind you, I was 20 years old, was a huge accomplishment of mine. And that's kind of where now I'm looking back and it impacted me greatly because I was 20 years old telling 35, 40-year-old people what to do, and people didn't want to listen to me. So then I'm not good enough, or I'm not knowledgeable enough. I'm not worthy of this rank, and immediately again spiraled me in depression, spiraled me in anxiety. And what I tried to control everything.
So what were some of your methods of control then during the military? Because high school obviously was drugs, but what could you do? What was your out or numbing out for while you were in the military?
A big part of it was, of course, like using rank. Like that's literally the end all be all. It's like, well, look at your chest, look at mine. Okay, who's bigger? Go do it. And that was a huge thing. And that was the first time I actually felt control in my life rather than leadership. just because of the division I was in and everything else, the branch, the battalion, whatever you want to call it. It was a very small niche of the military, so it kind of lived in its own world.
Sure.
So, that power struggle was just prominent everywhere in that unit.
How did you make that distinction between the control of rank versus actually leadership, and then stepping into and developing yourself as a leader?
Yeah, the first step from that, because when I was promoted to a sergeant, I didn't have a soldier at first. I was the colonel's driver and gunner. I worked directly for the full bird colonel. I did everything administrative wise, driving wise. We did, task operations, everything like that, and assisted pretty much in all of what he needed. But once I got pushed down to a battalion to be, in charge of maintenance, I started at the brigade maintenance, and of course didn't have a soldier then because I was all at brigade operations, overseeing how the entire unit worked, and then going down to a battalion and having soldiers for the first time. It was like, wow, these people actually depend on me. And then I had to find a little bit more compassion and understanding, and I had to bring myself back and put myself in their shoes, which I'd never had to do before. And really learning how to be compassionate and intuitively listening to what sounds right versus what this says.
That's good.
And looking at a regulation, and yeah, of course I would go against some regulations on some things, but I would strictly do it only in the premise of upholding a value that I saw true.
Yeah.
And kind of carving and shaping my own leadership.
A pretty strong leadership quality already at that age and where you're at, just to be able to kind of, again, I use the word rebellious. I don't know why that keeps coming up, but kind of in your own, start to stand in your own power of what is right for you and what resonates with you. So there was always, seems like early on, there was still this deep, innate, intuitive longing and seeking for something that was truth for yourself that you were kept stepping into.
Right.
Yeah.
And just with that leadership quality alone, and just, again, like you say, that rebellious style, I actually found
it's
that.
It's a gift.
Yeah.
It is a gift.
Some would say.
Yeah.
But I actually found over time that the soldiers I was responsible for responded a lot more to it because it was real.
Yeah.
People didn't look at me like I was black and white. People saw me in color, people saw me in gray, and people could come to me with their issues when they needed to understand the difference between that black and white and gray area.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about where did you start to really look at post being in the military and set some goals for where did some of those distinctions or values start to become important for you that defined you moving into what you're doing now? How did you start to set some of those goals?
Yes, one of the first goals I set is I want to be a professional bodybuilder. I want to be the guy on the front of a fitness magazine. I want to be the guy who's standing on the Olympia stage holding a trophy that all of these other youthful men look up to and aspire to be like. Because I didn't really have a role model growing up, but I wanted to be a role model. I wanted to be seen as important. So that was my first goal, was I want to become an IFBB professional bodybuilder. And then from there, I want to build my online, coaching or my preparation coaching business. And that's where I really set my first goal in fitness. And, I ended up going to a different organization, getting a pro card with Global Bodybuilding Organization, and then going back to compete with the NPC, winning a show. And then right before going to the IFBB Pro Qualifier, I had leaned on a granite counter when I was a trainer at a corporate gym, and it was installed improperly. So when I leaned on the counter, it snapped off, tore my whole hand open.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. So, I was 253 pounds at the time, and tore 4 tendons, severed my radial artery, my median nerve, can't feel these 2 fingers, can't fully make a full fist right now. And my goals had to seriously be reevaluated at that time.
Yeah.
And my only goal then was get healthy and get back on stage.
Yeah. Well, which was leading me to my next question that I was thinking about is so talking about some of those failures, where have you failed in some of those initial goals that you set up, and how did you pick yourself back up and start over?
Yeah. So, one of the failures was just even if I didn't win a show, that first failure of wow, this is my first show and I got 16th place. That is terrible, and not understanding. But you didn't quit. No, definitely not. And that's when I really had to reevaluate, okay, well, what do I need to do to improve? And a lot of that was based on feedback of other people, feedback of judges. Of course, it being a very subjective sport, I got the subjective opinions of people, but took the feedback well, applied it, and then ended up going back and then winning the next.
Yeah. And before moving on to that, what were some of the thoughts, if you remember, what were some of the thoughts that you were having about yourself at that time when you first failed?
Man, like, oh, I don't look good. These other guys look better than me. You know, the relationship I was in at the time, like, oh wow, she doesn't think I'm very attractive, you know, especially after this rebound diet. It's like, oh well, look at all this work I just did. It was for nothing. And you know, I really had to work hard on pulling myself out of that, because it's easy to just pitfall.
Totally.
Especially
which
in the
is where a
competition
lot
world.
of people fail and just don't pick themselves back up to start over. Like there's something about, you know, that hearing all of that, and then also still having that bigger why and that bigger goal ahead that you keep focusing on.
Right.
Yeah. And so you were talking about, you know, just that failure and how you were starting over. Is there anything more you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, and I mean, it kind of just led all the way up until that granite countertop, you know, and having to be like, wow, I'm getting surgery for the very first time, 3 surgeries in 2 days.
And that must have been a huge letdown for what you had planned and what was coming up.
Yeah, because I was literally 4 months to the pro qualifier, something that I had been building up for over 3 years, a body that I've been building for 3 years to specifically go to that show and win. And
then what happened? You had surgeries, and then what happened?
I realized how unhealthy I was. Like
mentally,
I went,
physically, or
both.
Spiritually? Okay.
Yeah, completely, in all different avenues.
Okay.
You know, mentally, because after my accident, like being in a little sling or a cast like this and not being able to use my dominant hand, having to learn how to write with my left hand, having to learn how to brush my teeth with my left hand and do the most simple tasks, being such a big, strong guy, crippled me.
Yeah. What would you say if you were to choose one word inside of that was the lesson for all of that? What would be one word that would describe that?
Humility.
Yeah.
For sure.
It definitely teaches humility with that.
Yeah. You know, and it was to the point where I broke down crying. I was having suicidal thoughts.
Yeah.
You know, for
during that period after the surgery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, because the original ones was just as a kid being bullied and all that. But having that again come into my life, and then physically going to the hospital and having them tell me that I have severe liver toxicity, I have an acute kidney injury from all the steroid use. I literally couldn't even sit on the ground and play with my daughter because I was that big, that stiff, and physically just uncomfortable.
Which I would never know that watching some of your videos. I mean, I've watched you for a while, and your videos that you put on are so awesome on Instagram. And just the graceful way that you flow and move is so beautiful.
Thank you.
It's really nice. So go back just for a second. What were some of the thoughts, if you can remember at that time, what were some of your suicidal ideation thoughts? What were some of those? Just share that with us. Like what would you want to do? How long did you have this going on? How did you seek help?
Yeah.
What was the transforming moment where something shifted?
I mean, like some of the thoughts I was having was just like driving my car with my left hand and like not being able to shift my car. And I was like, you know what? That freeway wall looks really good right about now. You know, and
that was always one of mine is driving. It's
Yeah.
one of the easiest ways to just make it happen.
Yeah. And it'd be quick. And
hopefully
that's how I would go about it,
Yeah.
you know? And, you know, even from that point, it was like, well, because I wasn't taking the painkillers. I didn't want any opiates.
Yeah.
So I had my medical marijuana card. I was smoking weed, but that only did so much. Some of those strands that I smoked even made it worse. So it even like threw me into more anxiety, you know, so I had to really be careful with how I was taking care of myself.
How were you getting support during that time? I mean, were you sharing with anybody that you were having suicidal thoughts, or was it you just keeping it to yourself?
Oh, I definitely internalized it.
Yeah.
Like I didn't really have like real friends. And that's what I realized. Like going through that accident, like nobody checked on me.
Yeah.
Like other than my family, and you know, my family contacted their church pastors, and that's kind of when I got back into that, you know, because I was just completely disconnected from the church. I was disconnected from faith. I was disconnected by spirit, now I call it, you know, and, you know, I really just started having these thoughts like, nobody's going to miss me anyways. You know, like my kids are probably better off because what am I going to do now with a bum hand? I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to train again. I don't know if I'm ever going to be a bodybuilder. Like, what do I do?
Yeah.
What is the only option? Go to college, go get a degree in something, and go back to this education system that I hate, and do something that a 9-to-5 that I don't really enjoy doing.
Yeah. So was there ever a point that you attempted, or was it just stayed on the line of just ideation. Just
so
thoughts.
it was only like ideation through that bodybuilding time. There was a time in my youth where I had swallowed a bunch of pills, you know, and luckily my mom's a nurse, so you know that didn't happen, you know. But that was my first attempt as a child.
Yeah.
Not even sure what age. I think it was maybe 11 or 12.
Okay.
And then, you know, having these thoughts again, like I vowed to myself, like, I can't do this. The only thing that kept me going was, you have kids, and you need to be their dad.
Yeah. It's interesting because I find in the interviews that I do around suicide awareness prevention that for people that do have kids, there's a moment where, you know, you think about it and then there's either an attention or there's not, but there's a moment inside of all that. If we go back and look at it, there's a moment and a thought or something that happens that saves us. And it's oftentimes it's for our kids. And for myself, I know that's what it was. But a lot of the interviews that I talked to or people that I talk to, that's one of the saving moments for them, or something interrupts that somebody calls or something like that. But we never get to go back and really talk about the fact that we've either attempted or wanted to because of the shame that's involved in that.
Right.
And so can you talk just a little bit about your shame around that and holding it in, and then when did you start actually communicating and talking about it?
Yeah, I mean, just the shame of feeling like I would be that selfish, like to take that away from my children. Like, who am I? Like, who am I to take that away from my kids? Like, does that mean I don't love them? Does that mean I don't know what love is? You know, it just brought about all these different thought processes and that shame of just saying like, wow, I can't believe I actually thought about that. Like, looking at my daughter and saying, I'm so sorry that I ever thought about losing you.
Yeah.
Like, it almost just brings me in tears now.
Yeah.
You know, like.
It's weird I can feel that because it almost brings me to the same way, because it's, you know, it's part of where, you know, I felt the same way when I was at that point with my own kids. I realized in that moment to the depth of which I love them, and that my whole life, even, and I've said this before, like, even though it doesn't look that way in day-to-day activities, but my whole life, my existence is for them, and everything else that I get to do in life is an expression of me being their father. And it was such a weird moment to realize the depth of that, and how much I love my kids.
Yeah.
Even though it doesn't always appear that way, and you know, we're flawed and we make mistakes, but it was a very clear defining moment for me that certainly saved me.
Yeah. And I mean, the only real outlet I have were, you know, women in my life.
Yeah.
You know, and not even including not my mom, not my sister or anyone else, but like I've been in relationship back to back, right? So I would always confide, but not confide, more like dump that and then exhaust the relationship. Yeah. You know, and that was my only outlet, and I never really knew how to communicate that in a healthy manner. Yeah.
So let's go for a second then. What was your transition from kind of that period of your life to now you've moved past, you've moved past the surgeries, you've started kind of stepping into this new phase of your life, you've started doing some new things. What would you say began your mindful spiritual journey into where you're at currently? What was kind of that defining moment? What was that transition for you?
Yeah, I mean, just looking at that transition, it's just acknowledging that I had a problem.
Did you acknowledge that just to yourself or with someone, or how did that go about?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was when I went back to church.
Okay.
You know, I started going back into the church. I got baptized again August 20th of 2017. So coming up on a 2-year anniversary, but really being back in a church and hearing different principles and aspects of how to live an abundant life, you know, really started opening my eyes. Yeah. It started opening my eyes to like, well, that's not how I've been living my life. Yeah. So maybe I need to dig a little bit deeper.
And then what were some of the thoughts and the goals that you started to set or create from that? Or even how did you start to dream from that point?
Yeah, I mean, the dream from that would have just been like, I want to be more connected to God. I want to be more connected to spirit. And, you know, going through this journey and being a Christian for the majority of my life, and then stumbling upon other aspects of, you know, spirituality and looking into different aspects of being mindful and expanding consciousness. And I think what really was revolutionary for me was, my DMT experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that shifted my entire perspective on everything. And I had experienced what they call the ego death. And that was the most terrifying moment of my life. But
I've not experienced that in my DMT journey, in my DMT journeys, but I've heard people talk about that. But mine was so different than that. Can you say just a little bit about that for yourself? And it had to have been a defining moment for you then.
Yeah, I mean, I literally felt and thought that I was dying in that present moment. And I was terrified of losing the women in my life, because all I would hear were women's voices telling me to breathe. And all I could think about was, I need to get back to my girls. I need to get back to my family. I have people that need me. Like, what's happening? Because it became very hard to breathe. I started coming off the ground, like my spine. I used to have a bursa over my spine and my T1, T2, where I loaded 800 pounds on my back. And I've always asked doctors about it, and they're like, oh, we can drain it with a needle. But after this experience, gone. And that was a big limiting factor on the function of my body. And really feeling what it was like to be just completely purged.
Yeah.
Like it almost just felt like I had a mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual reset all in one.
Yeah.
And it made me view the world so much differently. And then I started thinking, like, I experienced what I would think is death for the first time. And I'm worried about all this other small stuff in my life. Why?
Yeah.
How can I really navigate through this process? And how can I create what I want versus what I think I need?
For sure. And how would you say now, kind of at the end of that then, where we are currently, how does your mindful movement flow practice impact who you are today, like on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I mean, it impacts me. It impacts my brand. I rebranded my entire business after a year and a half.
Talk a little bit about your practice. Tell us a little bit about that.
Right. So right now it is, specifically a movement-based practice, movement assessments, optimization. I use a lot of dynamic neuromuscular stabilization, being the only certified personal trainer that is a certified DNS trainer in the state. There are some chiropractors who use these exercises in their practice to stabilize chiropractic adjustments, but also on how to retrain the neurology behind how we stabilize and move our bodies.
So important. Adding that element in of working with the nervous system, like how you're doing with movement, but also anything that has to do with NLP or anything that you can do, I think, especially if you deal with any type of PTSD, depression, anything like that. I've started recently having some NLP, and it's made, between other things that, like with the gateway healing with Katie that we've talked about and that we've both done, there's just so many things to get into that element of healing that drastically impact just our day-to-day lives. You were talking about DMT for a second. It took me back to when you had that release out of your back is, whether it's personal growth or doing any kind of a medicine ceremony. I was doing Tony Robbins' Date with Destiny last December. And it was at the end of the week when we were kind of doing the integration process, and I was there with my little quad of 4 people, and at the end, I finished the process, and I was just standing there kind of soaking it in. My arms were up, just kind of in a celebration. And suddenly, I just felt like shame lift out. And I wasn't even I was working on shame, but I didn't even realize I was held in my body. But it was literally held in my whole thoracic. And I've never been able to move my thoracic. I've never been able my shoulders. I've always felt like this. And even when I get chiropractic adjustment, it's never adjusted. It's always the tightest part of my entire spine. And literally, I just felt like a ghost was just lifting out of me, just standing there. It was so real. And then afterwards, I felt 4 or 5 inches taller. My whole body moved. I could not even stand. Even weeks later, I'd be standing in the shower, with water coming down your eyes, and you open your eyes all of a sudden. And I would always have this experience of that I was taller in my shower, even looking at things compared to how I'd been before that experience. So it's just interesting how something like that is housed in your body. And then through, whether it's personal growth or a medicine ceremony, that can get released, or NLP, where you can have a greater experience of just being a human being and starting to live some of your purpose.
Yeah.
Without restrictions.
Exactly. And that's, why I've structured, my entire business on redefining human optimization through mind, body, and soul.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, right now I'm doing just a lot of the body work, and teaching people how to move in all different types of ways,
No, go ahead.
taking several different movement assessment strategies, compiling into my own, and then, helping correct that movement and help alleviate that dysfunction and that pain and that discomfort from people with the principles that I think are the best ways to apply them, and
Sure.
through several movement practices, whether that be steel mace flow, whether it be through animal flow, whether that be through functional range conditioning,
Yeah,
DNS,
I love your animal
everything.
flow videos. They're cool.
Yeah.
they're fun to watch.
Thank you.
I was like, I want to be able to flow like that. I'm not quite there yet, but I'm getting there. So say a word or two to connect these between us, because I think oftentimes we hear these three words so often that we don't stop and actually look at the relationship between the three. So the three words are body, mind, spirit, and just bridge the gap between those words for us. What would be a couple words that would bridge those gaps?
Awareness and intention.
Between both of them, or between body
between
and
all
mind?
three.
Okay.
Between all three.
Yeah. And so say a little bit more about awareness and intention. What does that mean to you in relationship to body, mind, spirit?
Right. So, in terms of the awareness, we have to be aware of how our thoughts are translating into our body. There's a saying that says that our emotional issues reside in our tissues.
Mm-hmm.
And working with so many people in pain for, so many years, and working with, 250 people in the last 2 years alone, finding out that no matter what I did, they were still in pain. So there had to be another reason, right? So really understanding the awareness behind, is it your emotional pain? Is it your physical pain? Is it your physiological pain? There's so many different factors to pain, whether it be psychological, physiological, anatomical, biological, however you want to, put it.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me really dig deeper and made me start applying the principle of, okay, well, you have to be aware of what you're thinking. You have to be aware of how you're creating that mind to body connection. Mm-hmm. And then you have to have a specific intention behind your movement. And really with, movement flow, essentially, and I'm starting to develop this group format where it's combining, developmental flow with articular flow with animal flow all into one big structure of mobility, stability, and strength all in one. It can be very spiritual. Mm-hmm. And now instead of having that, body awareness and that mental intention to our movement, now we can just freely express ourselves and explore movement and develop a further awareness of what we might need internally, intuitively.
Yeah.
And then moving with intention to now flip the script and create a body-mind connection and retraining the mind with our body. And then, being able to do all three at once.
And then take all that movement to the dance floor on the weekends and be free in your dancing, celebrating all of that. So let's talk a little bit, just for a couple minutes, about what have been some of the bucket list items that you have accomplished that have been phenomenal. Share just a couple minutes about that, and then what are some of the ones that you're like your top three that you're looking forward to? Because you had a couple on the list that was like, oh, that's actually, I would never do that, and that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it is a hard decision
What
to
are some of the
make,
three,
really.
what are your top three that you have done that have been cool that you would share?
Honestly, starting my own business
Okay.
was a huge bucket list item because, again, I've always gone against the grain.
Sure.
The rebellious nature.
Yeah.
And another, bucket list item was, having a child. Ever since I was a kid, I've always wanted to be a father.
How old did you know, what was the early stage when you knew you wanted to be a father?
10 or 11.
Yeah. I knew when I was 15, it was so clear. I was like, I want to be a father.
Mm-hmm. It's like, I want kids.
Yeah.
I love kids.
Yeah.
I always interacted really well with kids.
Yeah.
I've always interacted with people a lot older than me or people a lot younger than me. Never around the same
much
window.
How I am, yeah.
Yeah. So, those two bucket list items right off the top, were some great achievements.
And then what are a few of the ones that you are looking forward to doing that also scare the shit out of you?
Oh, number one, probably the most recently that's going to happen is having my first ayahuasca ceremony.
Oh, okay.
That, being a more recently added to the list of discovering, what this medicine is and doing a lot of the research and the reading and hearing the experience of others through, masterminds and groups and communities, and understanding that there is a healing nature behind it. It's not just a drug that you do on the weekend, like it's a party. You don't even hear about it.
It only, the saying is that Mother Ayahuasca calls you. You don't go do it. It's
Yeah.
something that calls you, and it's either you're called to do it or you don't. And in the journeys that I've had so far, they've been very powerful and very healing. My most recent one, I really experienced just complete, total, unconditional love for myself. Just my body, every part of my body, and just fell in love with myself at a whole new level that I had never experienced before. And it was fascinating. Also, the other thing that was kind of big was experiencing my connection with energy, in that everything around me is energy, and like I have defined as this body, but also when I can step away from how I know myself as defined as this body, I can also experience my skin and my eyes and my tissue and everything out here as well, because it's just put together in this structure.
Yeah.
So you'll enjoy the ceremony.
Oh yeah.
There was one that you had on there though, skydiving.
It is my greatest fear, is heights.
Mine is greatest fear as well, and so it's one of the things that I go after breaking that up, because they say, on the other side of fear, honestly, it's just being excited. Like, you're excited to do it. Fear is just excitement. It's just flip that emotion on the other side. So I did my first and only so far skydiving trip in Amsterdam.
Oh wow!
Over the island, looking at all the ocean around.
Which is another bucket list.
I know. So I was like,
same thing.
So on your exploration of Amsterdam, go do your skydiving trip. That was phenomenal. It was so beautiful and scary, scary all at the same time. Like, we're about halfway up, and I didn't realize there were like free floaters or whatever you call them that were also on our flight. And about halfway up, the plane kind of pauses, and somebody just jumps out of the plane. I'm like, holy fuck, what just happened? And he's just flying through the air, and he's just practicing his own fall or what have you. But he was one of the instructors. I'm like, we're not going to do that, are we? And then he's like 1, 2, and this jump is no 1, 2, 3. It's just like 1, 2, and like boom, you're out. And they basically push you out. Of course, you're connected to somebody, but
right.
The moment that it was past that, it was like, oh my God, this is so. And I fly a lot in my dreams, and so it was kind of like that. But it was really cool. I would recommend doing it there and not here in Arizona. It's like, what is there to see here? It's like,
I've been here the majority of my life. I can go do it over something risky.
Yeah. And so then let's talk a little bit about your meditation practice. How long have you been? When did you start meditating? And what's your practice like now?
Yeah, so I'm very early into it, less than 6 months now.
Okay.
And I have, again, had good days, had bad days, and the biggest part of that was just finding the right amount of time that worked for me.
How long do you meditate?
So I do a 3-minute life coaching little voiceover that kind of prepares me and what I may be feeling or struggling with that day. I have an app that I use, and it says, how are you feeling today? And I'll say how it feels.
Yeah.
And, and then based on how I feel, like, that's what it'll recommend.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I see.
So,
that's nice.
So it's a nice little tool to have.
Yeah.
And just being able to.
Now you can use focus for me.
Exactly. Right. And that's why I'm really excited about this. Yeah. So, being able to choose like a 3-minute little life coaching spiel or a little 3-minute talk.
And then how do you do that several times a day, or is it basically just it's
pretty much as needed.
Okay.
But I'm really adamant about, making sure I do it in the morning.
So you're mindful about it.
Yeah.
Doing it as often as needed.
Right.
Yeah.
And if I don't do it in the morning, I don't put a restriction saying, I missed my morning meditation. I can't do it today.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It's like, okay, if I have 30 minutes in between clients, like, I'll go in the back room and I'll hide or whatever. I'll sit in the middle of the gym floor and put in earphones, and I'll do it right there.
Right there. That's all you got to do. Just find that little space, a moment, and just sink in.
Yeah.
And it's crazy how, for me, I've noticed like how impactful and how much that changes and alters my entire day. I mean, it grounds me, it centers me, it brings me a lot of peace. But it also, what I've noticed for myself is it focuses me big time. Right. It really brings my focus into clarity of whatever else I need to handle for the rest of the day.
Yeah, I mean, my productivity just goes through the roof. Yeah. And then I do a 7-minute, breathwork specific meditation to just get everything going, and then I go right into movement.
Yeah.
And there's even times where my flow practice becomes my meditation, and I'll put on binaural beats. I'll put on different, tribal ceremonial music. I'll put on even just instrumental, like high gigahertz, frequencies in music. So, and really understanding and trying to move my body with the music.
Yeah.
And almost like dancing in a way, but it's finding that connection, but really plugging in and really programming my brain the way I wanted to in that moment.
Yeah, that was one of the things we added in with all of our music soundtracks that you can drop your I am declarations into and your goals into. They're all high frequency, esophageal frequency, megahertz, and they all have a different, they all kind of go down the scale of which ones you want to use. And then we also balance them out with the chakras and with the chakras. And so you can look at the playlist, kind of choose which one resonates for you. But what I have been doing is I put all of them on to repeat. So I listen to all of them at night, just real slow, and it's got the breathe in and the exhale behind it, so it reminds me as I'm sleeping to do that, which is working with my sleep apnea. But I've noticed just in doing that, just because it's going through all the different frequencies, how much it's just healing my body while I'm sleeping, and how I wake up so refreshed compared to before. Yeah. Just like reprogramming all of that.
Oh yeah, I'm really excited for that.
Yeah,
really excited.
Cool. So tell me about your, what would you say is your current gratitude practice?
I mean, my current gratitude practice is every single morning I use a journal, and I just name 3 things I'm grateful for. And a lot of the things that have been coming up for me lately is I'm grateful for the air I breathe. I'm getting very heavy into breathwork practice, into healing elements of breathwork, especially after Gateway Healing, and what I saw was possible with the combination, of course, with communication with spirit.
It's a really powerful combination between the breath and gratitude, and then also just connecting with spirit. It's
100%. And, I'm just showing gratitude for, the people that have love for me in my life, and the people that I'm surrounded with right now, and by such powerful people and communities. And then, of course, my children. It's every single day I'm grateful for my children.
What are 4 things that you're grateful for your childhood and your parents?
I'm grateful that, I witness chaos. I'm grateful that I did learn what a household should not be, and I'm grateful that I learned how to form an authentic and vulnerable connection with a woman, my sister, and being able to talk to women freely now about how I feel, and having that sense of femininity to where I can connect on a much deeper level. And then again, I'm grateful for the experiences of being bullied and, being treated like I wasn't someone who belonged. Because now, instead of feeling like I need to belong to something, now I'm just paving my own way, and my vibe will attract my tribe. And that's something I live by thoroughly now.
And your number one gratitude is?
My children.
And how would you say that?
I am grateful for the souls that I have been blessed with in my life.
They teach us so much. What else would you like to leave us with when it comes to your mindful practice, meditation practice, and just a little bit more about who you are, your passion?
Yeah,
I kind of finish up here.
It's just been a journey, man. Like looking back, and I remember a talk that I had at Matt's group where we actually met from Seth.
A year ago, October, yeah.
From Seth.
Yeah.
Seth Madison, and this
that was a powerful talk. I was crying.
Yeah
Changed
everything. And it really made me understand like that one question, like, who am I? And like the last thing I would leave is like, man, if you don't know who you are, like it's a journey to find, but I'm not even fully there yet in my own opinion.
It takes time.
It takes so much time, but it's just the relentless pursuit for excellence, for self is really what keeps me going.
And so if you were to answer that question now, who are you? Who am I?
I'm a passionate, loving man who is on a mission to redefine human optimization through mind, body, and soul.
That's awesome, brother. All right, cool. That's a wrap. That's amazing. It was so great just having you here. Thank you very much, and just for sharing yourself and your story and being vulnerable and authentic. And I know that your story will certainly reach a lot of like-minded people who can relate to where you've been and inspired by where you're going. So thank you.
No, thank you for having me, and thank you for the opportunity. And I'm looking forward to this app, man. It's gonna be super exciting. I'm very excited.
All right, awesome. Thank you.